The letter fell from my father's old ledger like a confession, its crisp folds still sharp despite being hidden for what looked like years. My hands trembled as I unfolded it, sitting cross-legged on the dusty attic floor surrounded by boxes of his belongings. My name is Lila, and until that moment, I thought I knew everything about my father. My dearest Lila, the letter began in his familiar, precise handwriting. If you're reading this, I'm gone, and I've failed to make things right. The business isn't what you think. I had to mortgage everything, the house, the company, even your college fund, to keep us afloat. I'm sorry, sweetheart, but there's something else you need to know. Trust no one, especially those closest to you. The attic suddenly felt colder. Through the small window, I could see my husband Bryce pulling into our driveway in his new BMW. The car he'd insisted we could afford, despite my concerns about our finances. Honey, his voice echoed from downstairs. You up there? I quickly folded the letter and slipped it into my pocket. Just going through Dad's things, I called back, trying to keep my voice steady. Footsteps creaked up the attic stairs, and Bryce's head appeared through the hatch. Still at it? It's been 3 months since he passed. Maybe it's time to let go. I forced a smile, but my mind was racing. Dad's warning about trust echoed in my head as I watched my husband's eyes drift to the ledger in my lap. Something in his expression made me uneasy. Found anything interesting? He asked too casually. Just old business records. I lied, closing the ledger. Nothing important. Bryce nodded, but there was something off about his smile. Listen, I've been thinking. With your dad's estate still in probate, maybe we should consider moving in with my parents for a while. Save some money. The suggestion hit me like a slap. We'd discussed this before, and I'd always refused. Vivian, my mother-in-law, had a way of making me feel small, insignificant. But now, with Dad's letter burning a hole in my pocket, I wondered if there was more to Bryce's suggestion than simple economics. I need some time to think about it, I said, standing up and brushing dust from my jeans. We can't keep putting this off, Lila. The mortgage payment is due next week, and with your father's debt. I froze. What do you mean, my father's debt? Bryce's expression flickered for just a moment. Surprise? Guilt? Before smoothing into concern. I just assumed, with the business struggling before he died. But I was already pulling away, my mind spinning. How did he know about the business struggles? I'd only just discovered them myself. I should get dinner started, I muttered, pushing past him toward the stairs. Lila, wait. I didn't stop. In the kitchen, I mechanically began pulling out ingredients, trying to make sense of everything. Dad's warning, Bryce's knowledge of the debt, his sudden push to move in with his parents. It all felt connected, but I couldn't see how. My phone buzzed with a text from Vivian. Bryce tells me you're finally considering moving in. We'll take good care of you, dear. After all, family takes care of family. I stared at the message, Dad's words echoing in my mind. Trust no one, especially those closest to you. Looking out the kitchen window, I watched Bryce examining his car in the driveway, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in low tones. For the first time in our marriage, I wondered if I really knew the man I'd married. One thing was certain. I needed to find out what else my father had hidden in those boxes before anyone else did. Moving day arrived faster than I'd expected. I stood in our empty living room, watching the movers load the last of our furniture into their truck. Each box they carried felt like another piece of my independence slipping away. Isn't this exciting? Vivian breezed through the front door in a cloud of expensive perfume. Harold's already cleared out the entire east wing for you both. I forced a smile, remembering the letter hidden in my purse. Over the past week, I'd discovered more of Dad's financial records, but they raised more questions than answers. Large sums of money had moved through his accounts, far more than his business should have handled. That's generous of you, I managed. Oh, sweetheart. Vivian touched my arm, her manicured nails pressing just a little too hard. We take care of our own. You'll see. Bryce appeared behind her, carrying a box labeled personal documents. My stomach clenched. Those were my father's papers. Ones I hadn't finished going through. I'll take that up to our room, I said quickly, reaching for the box. Don't be silly, Bryce smiled, pulling it away. The movers can handle it. Actually, I started, but Vivian cut me off. Lila, dear, come look at the paint samples I've chosen for your room. The current color is so dated. As she steered me toward her car, I caught sight of Bryce handing the box to Harold, who carried it toward his study instead of the moving truck. Something about their exchange seemed rehearsed, practiced. The Calloway mansion loomed before us, all Georgian columns and manicured hedges. Our new prison, dressed up as Salvation. That evening, after an elaborate welcome-home dinner, I slipped away to find Dad's box. Harold's study door was locked, but voices drifted through the crack beneath it. "She's getting suspicious," Bryce was saying. "The timing has to be perfect." "Your father's taking care of the paperwork," Vivian replied. "Once everything's transferred." "Lila!" Harold's voice behind me made me jump. He stood in the hallway, holding a glass of whiskey, his expression unreadable. "Lost. I gestured vaguely. "Looking for the bathroom. Third door on the left," he said quietly. Then, as I turned to go, "Lila, sometimes the best way to protect yourself is to keep your eyes open and your mouth shut." I lay awake that night, Harold's words tumbling through my mind. Beside me, Bryce's breathing was too even, too controlled. He was awake too. The next morning, I made my move. While everyone was at breakfast, I slipped into Harold's study through the garden door, a trick I'd learned from Bryce years ago. The box wasn't there, but something else caught my eye, a folder labeled Hawthorne Acquisition. Inside were documents showing my father's company had been bought out months before his death, by a shell corporation owned by the Callaways. "Looking for something?" I whirled around. Vivian stood in the doorway, her smile sharp as a knife. "I was just snooping." She stepped inside, closing the door. "You know, when Bryce first brought you home, I told him you were too clever for your own good. But he insisted you'd be manageable." The word hit like a slap. "What did you do to my father's company?" "We saved it, dear. Though he never knew who his angels were." She perched on Harold's desk. "The question is, what are you going to do with this information?" I thought of Dad's warning, of Harold's cryptic advice, of all the pieces falling into place. "That depends," I said carefully, "on what you're planning to do next." Vivian's smile widened. "Smart girl. We should talk, just us women. Over tea tomorrow? There's so much about family business you still need to learn." I nodded, my mind already racing ahead. They thought they had me trapped, but they'd forgotten something crucial. I was an accountant, trained to follow money trails. And now I knew exactly where to look. As I left the study, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "If you want to know the truth about your father's death, meet me at the old factory. Come alone." Ush! The game was changing, and I was done playing by their rules. The old factory loomed against the darkening sky, its broken windows staring down at me like empty eyes. I checked my phone again, 7:15 p.m. Harold's message had said 7 o'clock. My hands were shaking as I pulled Dad's letter from my pocket, reading it one more time before heading inside. The main floor was a maze of rusted machinery and shadows. My footsteps echoed off concrete walls, each sound making me jump. A crash from above sent my heart racing. "Hello," I called out, immediately regretting it. "Up here." Harold's voice drifted down from the metal staircase. "Second floor office." I found him sitting behind a dusty desk, looking smaller somehow, away from Vivian's influence. A manila envelope sat in front of him. "I was starting to think you wouldn't come," he said. "Start talking." My voice was steadier than I felt. "What do you know about my father?" He pushed the envelope toward me. "Your father came to me 6 months before he died. He knew what Bryce and Vivian were planning. Inside were bank statements, transfer records, and emails. A paper trail showing how the Callaways had systematically drained my father's company through their shell corporation." "Why are you showing me this?" "Because," Harold started, but a voice from the doorway cut him off. "Because he's trying to save himself." Bryce stepped into the office, his familiar smile now looking like a stranger's. "Always hedging his bets, aren't you, Dad?" My stomach dropped. "You followed me?" "Of course I did. You're my wife." He said it like he was explaining something to a child. "And you're getting dangerously close to ruining everything." "The company takeover," I said, pieces clicking into place. "The mortgage, the debts, it was all you?" "It was business." Bryce moved closer, his eyes on the envelope in my hands. "Your father was going to expose us. We couldn't let that happen." The implication hit me like a physical blow. "What did you do to him?" "Nothing he didn't bring on himself." Bryce reached for the envelope. "Now, let's go home and discuss this like family." I stepped back, clutching the documents. Was his heart attack really natural? "Lila." Harold stood up, but Bryce silenced him with a look. "Give me the envelope," Bryce said softly. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I glanced at Harold, who wouldn't meet my eyes. Then at Bryce, this man I'd loved, now a stranger wearing my husband's face. "No." I backed toward the door. "I'm taking these to the police." Bryce moved faster than I expected. His hand clamped around my arm, fingers digging in. "You really think they'll believe you over us? We own half the town." I twisted away, but he held tight. In the struggle, papers spilled across the floor. As Bryce reached for them, I saw something I hadn't noticed before, a document with my father's signature, dated the day he died. "You forged his signature," I whispered. "That's how you got control of everything." "Bryce!" Harold's voice cracked. "This has gone too far." "Stay out of it," Bryce snapped. "You've done enough damage." I took advantage of his distraction, yanking free and running for the stairs. Bryce's footsteps thundered behind me. "Lila! Stop!" I ran faster, clutching the remaining documents. The main floor was darker now, machinery casting strange shadows. I ducked behind a large press, trying to quiet my breathing. "You can't hide forever," Bryce called out. "Think about what you're doing. To me, to my mother, to our marriage." My phone buzzed, a text from Vivian. "Where are you, dear? Dinner's getting cold." I switched it off, hearing Bryce's footsteps getting closer. In the darkness, I could almost hear Dad's voice from his letter. "Trust no one." Now I understood why. I had the evidence I needed, maybe not all of it, but enough to start. The question was, could I make it out of here to use it? Bryce's shadow fell across the floor near my hiding spot. "Found you." I managed to escape the factory that night, but my relief was short-lived. 3 days later, I sat across from Sarah Chun, my father's former secretary, in a quiet coffee shop 2 towns over. My hands trembled as I stirred my untouched latte. "I always wondered when you'd come asking," Sarah said, sliding a worn leather planner across the table. "Your father kept this separate from his official records." I grabbed it the day after. Well, you know. The planner was filled with my father's cramped handwriting, meetings, notes, and most importantly, a list of names. Next to each one was a number and the initials VC. "Vivian Calloway," I whispered. Sarah nodded. "Your mother-in-law had quite the reputation in business circles. She'd find struggling companies, offer to help, then strip them bare. Your father was investigating her when he died." My phone buzzed, another text from Bryce. "Come home. We can work this out." I switched it off. "There's something else," Sarah said, lowering her voice. "The night before your father died, he called me. He was meeting someone at the country club, said he had proof of everything. But he never showed up for work the next day. The coffee shop suddenly felt too small, too exposed. Why didn't you go to the police?" "With what?" "A suspicious heart attack and circumstantial evidence." She shook her head. "The Calloways own half the police force. Besides, I had my own family to protect." A familiar voice carried across the shop. "Another Americano, please." Harold stood at the counter, his back to us. "Back door," Sarah whispered, gathering her things. "And Lila? Be careful. You're not the first person to try taking them down." I slipped out just as Harold turned around, clutching the planner to my chest. My car was parked 2 blocks away, but I barely made it halfway before a black SUV pulled up beside me. "Get in." Vivian's voice, sharp as broken glass. "I'd rather walk." "That wasn't a request, dear." The back door opened, revealing Vivian in her perfectly pressed suit. "Unless you want Harold to find your friend Sarah in there." I got in. "You know," Vivian said as we drove, "I actually liked you at first. Quiet, efficient, perfect for Bryce. But you just couldn't leave well enough alone, could you? Like my father couldn't?" Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Thomas made his choices. Just like you're making yours." We pulled up to the mansion, where Bryce waited on the steps. The sight of him made my stomach turn. "I found these in your desk," he said, holding up bank statements, my secret account, the one I'd been slowly building since finding Dad's letter. "You went through my things?" "You went through mine first." He grabbed my arm, fingers digging into the same bruises from the factory. "We need to talk." "Let go of me." "Or what? You'll run to the police." Vivian laughed softly. "With what evidence?" "A dead man's planner and some circumstantial banking records." But something in her voice caught my attention, a hint of worry. She was afraid of something in that planner. "Maybe I'll talk to the other families you destroyed," I said, watching her reaction. "Compare notes." Her perfectly composed face cracked, just for a moment. "Bryce, take her inside. Now." As he dragged me toward the house, I caught sight of Harold watching from his study window. His expression was unreadable, but he held up his phone, showing me a text message. "Storage Unit 23. Security code 7149. Hurry." My father's voice echoed in my head. "Trust no one." But sometimes I realized you have to trust someone to survive. That night, lying awake in what had become my prison, I made my decision. Tomorrow, I'd find out what was in that storage unit. But first, I needed to deal with the wild card in this game, Harold himself. The question was he truly trying to help me or setting me up for an even bigger fall? Either way, I was done being the quiet, efficient wife they thought they knew. It was time to show them exactly who they were dealing with. Storage Unit 23 was at the edge of town, hidden behind rows of identical metal doors. I'd managed to slip away during Vivian's weekly charity board meeting, but my time was limited. The security code Harold gave me worked. The lock clicked open with a sound that echoed in the empty corridor. Inside, stacked boxes filled the small space. My father's handwriting marked each one. Callaway evidence. My hands shook as I opened the first box. Inside were documents, photos, and USB drives. Years of careful investigation into the Callaway's schemes. But what caught my eye was a manila envelope labeled insurance. I wouldn't open that if I were you. I spun around. Bryce stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, looking almost sad. How did you? My father isn't as subtle as he thinks. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Did you really think he was trying to help you? I clutched the envelope tighter. He's tired of the lies. Just like I am. No, he's protecting himself. Like always. Bryce moved closer. You know what's funny? I actually tried to stop them from targeting your father's company. But Mom said it was necessary. A test of loyalty. And you chose them over me. I chose survival. His laugh was hollow. You think you're the first person to try exposing us? Ask Harold about his brother sometime. About what happened when he tried to go public. A chill ran through me as I remembered Sarah's words. You're not the first person to try taking them down. What happened to him? Nothing that could be proved. Bryce reached for the envelope. Just like nothing could be proved about your father's convenient heart attack. The confession hit me like a physical blow. I backed away, but my heel caught a box, sending me stumbling. Papers scattered across the floor, bank statements, photos, and something else. A medical report with my father's name. You killed him. The words came out as a whisper. Mom did what was necessary. Like she always does. He moved to block the door. The question is, what are you going to do now? My phone buzzed, a text from Vivian. Meeting ended early. Where are you, dear? They're coming, aren't they? I said, watching Bryce's expression. He nodded. Mom likes to clean up her own messes. I looked at the scattered evidence, at the man I'd once loved, at the door he was blocking. Then I remembered something from my father's planner, a note about the storage facility's back entrance through the maintenance corridor. You know what your mistake was? I said, stepping closer to Bryce. You all thought I was weak, that I'd keep playing by your rules. Lila. I threw the envelope at his face. As he instinctively reached to catch it, I shoved past him, running for the maintenance door I'd spotted earlier. His curses echoed behind me as I sprinted through the corridor. My car was 3 rows over. I could hear voices now, Vivian's sharp commands, Harold's deeper tones. They were closing in. But they'd forgotten something crucial. I wasn't just running away. I had photos of everything on my phone, copies of Dad's evidence already uploaded to secure servers. And most importantly, I had the medical report proving they'd tampered with my father's heart medication. As I peeled out of the parking lot, I caught a glimpse of Vivian's face in my rearview mirror, no longer composed but twisted with rage. Beside her, Harold watched me go with what looked almost like pride. My phone rang, an unknown number. I answered on speaker. You've made a serious mistake, Vivian said. No, I replied, surprising myself with how steady my voice was. My mistake was not seeing you all for what you really are. But Dad did. And now everyone else will too. I ended the call and took the highway exit. In my bag was a copy of Dad's planner, with one name I hadn't investigated yet. Detective Marcus Chun, Sarah's brother. Maybe it was time to find out if there was still one honest cop in this town. The game had changed. Now I wasn't just fighting for justice. I was fighting for survival. And I was done playing defense. Detective Marcus Chen's office was exactly what I expected, small, cluttered, and hidden in the basement of the police station. What I hadn't expected was to find Vivian already there, perched on the edge of his desk like she owned it. There you are, dear. Her smile was razor-sharp. We were just discussing your father's case. Chen wouldn't meet my eyes. The medical report I'd brought felt heavy in my bag, suddenly useless. Amazing timing, Vivian continued, standing. The detective was about to explain how your father's death was clearly natural causes. Weren't you, Marcus? He nodded, shuffling papers on his desk. The original investigation was thorough. There's no reason to reopen it. But the medication, I started, was properly prescribed, Chin cut in. I'm sorry, Miss Hawthorne, but there's nothing here. I watched Vivian's reflection in the window behind his desk, saw her slip something into her purse. Another payoff another person bought. Show her what you found in the storage unit, Vivian said softly. Chen pulled out a familiar envelope, the insurance file I thought I'd escaped with. But this one was different, thicker. We executed a search warrant this morning, he said, not quite hiding his shame. Found evidence of tax fraud, money laundering, all tied to your father's company. That's impossible. But even as I said it, I remembered Dad's complicated financial maneuvers, the desperate attempts to keep his business afloat. The evidence is quite clear, Vivian said. The question is, how involved were you? As his accountant, the trap snapped shut. They'd turned everything around, made me the criminal instead of the victim. And they'd done it legally through the proper channels. My phone buzzed, a text from Bryce. Last chance. Come home now, or Mom presses charges. I have copies, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Of everything. No, you don't. Harold stepped out from the shadows of the doorway. The cloud server was wiped an hour ago. Amazing what corporate cybersecurity teams can do. I looked between them, Vivian's triumph, Harold's resignation, Chen's guilt. They'd thought of everything. What do you want? What we've always wanted. Vivian moved closer, her perfume suffocating. Family unity. Sign these papers transferring your father's remaining assets to us. Admit publicly that your accusations were grief-induced delusions. And this all goes away. And if I don't, then Detective Chun has enough evidence to arrest you right now for financial fraud. She touched my cheek, a mockery of maternal concern. Think of your future, dear. Do you really want to end up like your father? The threat hung in the air. My father hadn't died of a heart attack. He'd died of a broken spirit, crushed under the weight of their manipulation. I'll need time to think, I said. You have 1 hour. Vivian gathered her things. We'll be waiting at home. Come along, Harold. As they left, Chen finally looked at me. I'm sorry, he whispered. They have my sister. Sarah. Of course they did. Alone in the basement office, I pulled out my father's letter one last time. Trust no one, he'd written. But he'd been wrong about one thing. He hadn't failed to make things right. He'd left me the blueprint for doing it myself. I took out my phone and dialed a number I'd memorized from his planner, one that wasn't labeled with initials or explanations. Just a single word, remember. It rang twice before a woman answered. Federal Banking Commission, Agent Martinez speaking. My name is Lila Hawthorne, I said, watching the door for any sign of the Callaways. I need to report a series of financial crimes. And I'm willing to wear a wire. Sometimes I realized the only way to win against people who've rigged the game is to change the players entirely. The Callaways thought they'd backed me into a corner, but they'd forgotten something crucial. Cornered animals fight the hardest. I had 1 hour to set my trap. It was time to show them what a desperate person could really do. The wire itched against my skin as I walked into the Callaway mansion for what I hoped would be the last time. Agent Martinez's words echoed in my head. Just get them talking about the company takeovers. We'll handle the rest. Vivian sat at the head of the dining table, elegant as ever in her pearls and perfectly pressed suit. Bryce stood by the fireplace, drink in hand. Harold was notably absent. Right on time, Vivian smiled. The papers are ready for your signature. I remained standing. Where's Harold? Taking care of some last-minute business, Bryce said. Sit down, Lila. Let's get this over with. Actually, I pulled out my father's planner. I'd like to discuss something first. Like how many other families you've destroyed besides mine. Vivian's smile tightened. Careful, dear. Detective Chun is just a phone call away. Funny you should mention phones. I placed mine on the table, screen up. A live recording app blinked steadily. I've been making some calls of my own. Bryce moved toward me, but Vivian held up her hand. What exactly do you think you're doing? Getting answers. Starting with Harold's brother. What really happened to him? That's ancient history, Bryce snapped. Like my father's convenient heart attack? The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Vivian's composure cracked just slightly. You have no proof. Don't I? I touched the wire under my blouse. Would you like to explain how you accessed his medical records? Or should I ask Harold? Harold? Vivian laughed, but there was an edge of uncertainty. He wouldn't. He already did. I nodded toward the doorway where Harold now stood, holding a stack of documents. Show her. I'm sorry, Vivian. Harold's voice was tired. I can't do this anymore. What have you done? Vivian whispered. What you taught me to do, protect myself. He placed the documents on the table. Signed confessions. Bank records. Everything. Bryce lunged for the papers, but I was faster, sliding them toward Agent Martinez, who stepped out from the kitchen, badge displayed. No! Vivian stood so quickly her chair toppled. You stupid man, do you realize what you've done? Saved himself, I said. Like you always taught us to do. More agents emerged from different doorways. Bryce made a break for it, but was quickly detained. Vivian remained eerily still, watching as her empire crumbled. You know what I never understood? I moved closer to her. Why my father? He wasn't wealthy, wasn't powerful. Why target him? Because he knew, Harold answered. About everything. The fraudulent takeovers, the offshore accounts, even about my brother. Thomas was gathering evidence. So you killed him, I said to Vivian. To protect your reputation. I protected my family, she hissed. Everything I did was for them. For their future. No. I pulled out my father's letter. Everything you did was for yourself. And now you've lost it all anyway. As the agents led them away, Vivian turned back. You'll regret this. Family should protect family. You're right. I looked at Harold, who nodded slightly. That's exactly what I'm doing. Later, standing in the empty mansion, Harold handed me one final document. Proof that my father's company had been transferred back to me. Why did you really help me? I asked. Because 30 years ago, I made the wrong choice. He looked around the house he'd lived in for decades. I chose security over justice. Your father would be proud of you for choosing differently. I watched through the window as the last police car drove away, taking with it the remains of the Callaway empire. The wire under my blouse had stopped itching, but I could still feel its weight. A reminder that sometimes the heaviest burden isn't seeking justice, but living with the consequences of finding it. My phone buzzed, a text from Sarah. Thank you. Some debts, I realized, could never be repaid. But some truths had to be told, no matter the cost. 6 months after the arrests, I stood in my father's old office, now mine again. The company was slowly recovering, though the ghosts of the past lingered in every corner. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. They're ready for you, Sarah said, looking professional in her reinstated position as office manager. The boardroom was packed with familiar faces, families who'd lost everything to the Callaways over the years. Harold sat in the back, looking older but somehow lighter. He'd taken a plea deal in exchange for his testimony, which had helped convict Vivian and Bryce. As you know, I began, we've recovered most of the assets the Callaways stole. Today, we start the process of returning them to their rightful owners. As I distributed the documents, I caught Harold's eye. He nodded slightly, acknowledging what we both knew. This wouldn't undo the damage, but it was a start. After the meeting, Harold lingered. I visited Vivian yesterday, he said quietly. She asked about you. And Bryce left for Singapore the day before his sentencing. The authorities are still looking. I should have felt something, anger, betrayal, loss. Instead, there was only a tired acceptance. Did she say anything else? She wanted you to know she understands now. About Thomas. About everything. He pulled out an envelope. She wrote this for you. I took it but didn't open it. Some answers weren't worth the price of reading them. Later that evening, I visited Dad's grave for the first time since the trial. The autumn air was crisp, leaves crunching under my feet as I approached the headstone. You were right, I said, placing fresh flowers. About trusting no one. But you were also wrong. I thought of Sarah, Harold, Detective Chun, people who'd risked everything to help expose the truth. Sometimes trust is the only way forward. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown international number. A photo of Bryce on some distant beach, drink in hand. Below it, 2 words, I'm sorry. I deleted it without responding. Some chapters needed to stay closed. Back home, my new apartment overlooking the city, I finally opened my father's letter again. The words that had started everything felt different now. Trust no one, especially those closest to you. But there was more, a part I'd missed in my initial shock. Until you trust yourself first. A knock at my door startled me. Through the peephole, I saw Harold looking anxious. There's something else you need to know, he said when I opened the door. About your father's company. There are other players involved, bigger than the Callaways. People who won't be happy about what you're doing. Are you warning me or threatening me? Neither. I'm offering to help. He handed me another file. Your father wasn't just investigating us. He found something bigger, something that scared even Vivian. That's why. He didn't finish, but he didn't need to. That's why they killed him. Why tell me this now? Because you deserve to know what you're up against. And because. He hesitated. Because doing the right thing shouldn't mean doing it alone. I thought about Vivian's letter, still unopened on my counter. About Bryce's text. About all the threads still left hanging. I'll think about it, I said. After Harold left, I stood at my window, watching the city lights flicker on. In my reflection, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. I looked like my father now, had his same determined set to my jaw. The file Harold gave me sat heavy on my desk, promising more secrets, more battles. Part of me wanted to throw it away, to finally find peace in what I'd already accomplished. But Dad's voice echoed in my head. Trust yourself first. I opened the file and began to read. Some stories don't end with justice served. They end with the choice to keep fighting for it, no matter the cost. And I was my father's daughter, after all.